turbulence shook the plane as I clenched the armrest of my seat. My nerves were already short-circuiting, considering this was my first deployment. On top of that, I just really hate flying. We were landing at Manas Airport, Kyrgyzstan. There was a small base not far from there that acted as a transfer hub for all the troops heading to Afghanistan. As the plane landed and we began moving into the gangway, I felt the frigid air penetrating my thick uniform. I could see my breath blowing in front of me like a cloud of white smoke. This was a stark contrast from the tropical paradise we had left only a day prior. Soldiers shuffled off the airplane, through the short walkway and into the lobby of the airport where we were instructed to sit down and await further instruction. Typical military style. Hurry up and wait. Soon after, we were given orders to remove the heavy winter coats from our duffel bags in preparation to go out into the harsh climate. January in Kyrgyzstan, it was no joke. The temperature had to be at least 20 below zero. I reached in and I pulled my jacket out of my duffel bag and up over my uniform. Then I slung the bag over my shoulder and I proceeded to follow the mass of men and women outside. The air struck my face, removing any moisture from my skin almost immediately. My eyes began to sting and my throat grew scratchy as I inhaled the freezing air. Luckily, it was only about a 20-yard walk to the buses, where we would be sheltered from the cold for another 15 minutes or so as we were transported to the base. We pulled up at the gate, guarded by 2 armed soldiers carrying AK-47s. They wore Ushanka hats and heavy coats. As they boarded the bus, they began going over the rules of the post in their thick Russian accents. "There will be no saluting," the first one began. "This is a neutral base, but still a war zone. We don't need enemies knowing who is in command." The other one followed without hesitation. "There is no alcohol on this FOB. Smoking is only allowed in designated areas only. There are 2 dining facilities, one located at the north end of the PX, one located south of Tent City." They must have done this speech 1,000 times, going back and forth with ease. "Weapons will not be carried. You are to check your weapons into the armory for the duration of your stay. When you depart, you will check your weapon out. Most importantly, should you hear an alarm of any kind, find your way to the nearest bunker and wait for the all clear. Welcome to Manas," they both said together, before turning and departing the bus. I turned to the soldier sitting next to me, last name Cook. We'd been in the same unit for just under 4 months, but unlike me, he had been through deployment process before. "No weapons?" I asked, dumbfounded. It seemed counterintuitive. "They have guys stationed here. If there's any need for them, they're the ones who'll handle it," he replied, with a combination of anxiety and frustration. I could tell that, although this wasn't his first deployment, it wasn't any less stressful for him. I nodded and faced forward, resting my head on the dark green duffel bag in my lap. The bus stopped and we were shuffled off into large tents about the size of a school gymnasium. Inside was surprisingly warm, with hundreds of bunk beds throughout. This was going to be home for the next 2 days. I quickly located my bed. This was easy considering the bunks all had a small piece of masking tape with our names crudely written in black permanent marker. I set my bags down on the mattress and I made my way through the crowds of people to find my buddy Travis. We went by last names though, so I usually just called him Weathers. He was my roommate back at barracks and we'd become pretty close. "Yo, Weathers," I shouted as I spotted him. He jerked his head up and began scanning the room. I waved my arms over my head as I made my way through the crowd. "Oh, hey bud," he said as he spotted me. "You want to go burn one and then hit the DFAC for some grub?" I asked as I made a smoking motion with my hand. There was a pavilion just outside of the tent that acted as one of the designated smoking areas we were told about. It had been around 27 hours, give or take, since my last smoke. I was aching for my nicotine fix. In addition to that, I was downright starving. "For sure, man. You should probably grab your beanie though. It's cold as shit out there." He motioned to my head, bald with a fresh buzz cut. "Yeah, true," I said, turning around and heading toward my bunk. "I'll meet you outside," I called back. After rummaging through my bag and pulling out various military-issued items, I finally found my beanie and gloves. I slipped the beanie over my head and the gloves onto my hands before heading out to the smoke pit. We finished our cigarettes in record time. The combination of cold and the craving for nicotine caused me to suck down the entire stick quicker than ever. We left the smoke pit and headed to the dining facility, or DFAC for short. As we walked along the snow-covered path, heading south, I noticed the ground vibrating beneath my feet. "You feel that?" I asked. I turned my gaze and I saw Weathers looking around confused. "Yeah, what are you—" He was cut off by a blaring alarm. It was odd, but it answered our question as to what could make the ground move under our feet. We reluctantly headed to a small concrete bunker nearby. They were all over the base, so finding one wasn't difficult. We sat there as the alarm died down, talking about things we already missed back home. "Oh man, I'm already wanting a beer," Weathers said. "Me? Some hungry jacks," I replied, laughing. Finally, the all clear sounded and we departed the bunker. As we walked toward the small tent that they called a dining facility, I noticed the ground shake again. This time, however, it was followed by a loud rumble. In the distance, snow-capped mountains lined the horizon, about 5 kilometers away. A vibrant beam of light erupted from the tallest peak, shooting straight up into the sky. The rumble grew louder, and the shaking, it grew more pronounced. The sight of this shooting blue light, it sent chills down my spine. Anxiety gripped my chest like a vice as the endless possibilities of what it meant began to run through my mind. "What is that?" I asked Weathers, trying to keep my balance as the vibrations became more violent. "I don't know," he replied, moving his hand in front of his eyes in an attempt to block the light. We heard a thunderous crash, and the ground trembled, sending us falling forward. After a moment, the movement came to an abrupt halt, then the blaring alarm began whooping across the base. When I looked up, a deeply unsettling sight painted the distant horizon. The mountain where the thin column of light had shot into the sky was now gaping open, split in half. A deep fissure radiated a silvery blue light from deep within. I could hear something faint that gained in volume as the seconds passed, until it was nearly deafening. Weathers and I quickly shot our hands up over our ears in a vain attempt to shield them from the piercing screech. It did little, if anything. As the wailing died down, Weathers and I looked up to the mountain. Troops had begun to mobilize, running to jump into vehicles mounted with 50 caliber automatic machine guns. I could hear the distant chopping sound of helicopters running up, preparing to take off. What happened next was both horrifyingly incredible and unforgettable. A giant thing of some sort rose from the hole. I wish that I could describe it as something more than just a creature, but it wasn't human. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It stood remarkably tall, at least double the height of the mountain, walking on two legs that bent backwards like that of a crane. Its skin, if you could call it a skin, consisted of large scales, and it was a deep, metallic red color. 4 arm-like appendages protruded from its torso. Each arm had 3 long, bony fingers with sharp, pointed black talons. The head was hideous, something like an upside-down triangle perched atop a thin neck. 2 segmented eyes reflected the bright light coming from inside the pit like a disco ball. 4 small pincers at the bottom of its head. They moved independently. Streaks of drool and slobber streamed down from the limp, purple tongue that hung out of its odd mouth. It released another deafening howl, the pincers extending outwards as its horrific shout echoed through the skies. I felt as if my brain would turn to mush as the shrill sound entered my eardrums, and I strained for a moment, trying to keep from passing out. It stepped out of the hole toward the base. Its slow, heavy movement shook the earth as it walked methodically toward the base, destroying everything in its path. The military personnel who had been stationed here, they seemed almost unfazed by this, slowly moving towards the bunkers like a herd of cattle. They seemed to understand what was happening, which only accentuated the fear in my mind. This was not normal, and how they could view it as normal was incomprehensible to me. My hand shot up over my mouth in sheer terror. There was absolutely nothing I could do. I had no weapon, and even if I did, what good would an M16 do against something that big? Weathers seemed to feel the same. He quickly shuffled to his feet and he reached over, extending his hand out in front of me. I didn't hesitate, quickly taking hold and pulling myself to my feet. "Go! Go!" he yelled, motioning in the opposite direction of the monstrosity. I wasn't one to argue with reason, and I quickly followed suit. We ran back, past our original bunker location where masses of soldiers and civilian contractors were gathered. Some shook with horror. Others simply waited patiently, unfazed by what was going on. A deep, rumbling chop took my attention away from the group and up to the skies, where I noticed a huge helicopter, unlike anything I'd ever seen, halting me in my tracks. It was jet black, save for a large, blood-red sickle and hammer painted onto a large cargo door on the back. Its colossus rotor spun at an intense speed, a deep thwop sounding with each rotation. The cargo door, which took up the entire rear of this thing, began to lower as it made its approach to the behemoth. It was hard to make out what emerged from the inside, but it appeared to be some kind of cannon. It approached the monstrosity that had now cut the distance between the mountain and the base in half and spun around. The cannon hung out the rear and now appeared to be aimed directly at this thing. I heard a noise, something like a high-pitched winding up, followed by a deep, melodic hum. It seemed to affect this thing, sending it into a daze. It began to stumble about, shaking the ground as it struggled to catch its footing. Weathers simply looked at me, baffled, and I returned the gesture, unable to fully comprehend what we were witnessing. It was as if this was a usual occurrence, like their response had been rehearsed time and time again until they had finally got it down to a choreographed movement. As the monster sloshed about, fumbling over its massive feet, the helicopter seemed to keep its distance. It would jut about, moving to maintain its aim with precision. The mountainous creature finally began to retreat, stumbling back toward the area which it had emerged from. The deep vibration continued piercing the air, acting as some sort of sonic lullaby used to force this thing back to its resting place. It made the trip back to the mountain just as quickly as it came, and just as fast as it appeared, it fell back into the canyon. As it landed beneath the horizon, a deep crack shot through the skies, echoing in the distance. The ground rumbled beneath my feet, and the white light, it grew so bright that my eyes instinctively sealed tight. After a moment, I slowly allowed my eyes to open. I peered off into the horizon, where the mountain had seemed to repair itself. The beam of light no longer jumped into the sky, and all had settled into an eerie calm. The giant halo had begun its descent down to the base, and I heard a voice come over the intercom of the base. All clear. All clear.